The US bombed Iran, and for the first time in many years, it got directly involved in the military campaign against it. I've been researching this topic for the past few weeks, and what I've found is wild. I want to show you what actually led to the strike, the history behind this conflict, and what it could mean for the future of the Middle East and the world. One of the first major conflicts between Iran and the US started in 1951, when the Iranian people elected Mohammad Mossadegh as prime minister. And at the time, Iran's oil was controlled by a British company, the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. They would later become BP, and they pulled oil out of Iran to sell it in Europe. But Iran only got a tiny share of the profits, so Mossadegh, being a nationalist, wanted to change that. In 1951, he nationalized Iran's oil. What he did was he basically kicked out the British oil company. But as you can probably expect, Britain was not happy. So the British government decided to fight back. And at first, they went to their allies, mostly in Europe, and were like, "Hey guys, Iran just stole my oil, so I would be grateful if you didn't buy any from them." They also pressured shipping companies, blocked Iranian ports, and tried to collapse Iran's economy. But this changed nothing, and this is where the US steps in. Britain asked them for help, and they basically said something like this: "America, you know I've been trying to overthrow this new Iranian prime minister, right? Yeah, that's because he might turn to the Soviets. So don't you think you should help with maybe overthrowing him?" And the US agreed, even though Mossadegh wasn't really a communist. But during the Cold War, that didn't matter, and Mossadegh suddenly looked like a threat. So in 1953, the CIA and British intelligence launched a secret operation called Operation Ajax. They basically created a propaganda machine in order to create distrust for Mohammed, and this actually worked. Within days, they brought his new government down. Mossadegh was arrested, put in trial, and removed from power, and Iran's king was brought back. He was a pro-American dictator, backed by the CIA and supported with US weapons and money. And most importantly, he gave the Iranian oil back to Britain. The Shah lived like royalty. Meanwhile, ordinary Iranians were struggling, and anytime people spoke out against the regime, the Shah's secret police were there to shut them up. Torture, disappearances, prison, all of it funded and trained by the US. The king claimed he was modernizing Iran, but most people saw a king who had sold the country out to the West. By the late 1970s, anger had turned into a movement. Protests exploded across the country, first by students, then workers, then millions of ordinary people. The king fled to Egypt, and a new leader took power, Ayatollah Khomeini. The Shah was now looking for a new safe place he could stay. But this was extremely hard, because the new Iranian government wanted to imprison him. So the king traveled a lot. Firstly, he went from Egypt to Morocco to stay as a guest of the king. Later, he went to the Bahamas, then Mexico, and finally, in October of 1979, the US let him into America for cancer treatment. But the new Iranian government wasn't happy with this. The US just took the guy they were trying to hunt down and basically gave him a free hiding spot. So they decided to fight back. In November 1979, a group of Iranian students stormed the US embassy in Tehran. They overpowered the guards, took control of the building, and captured 52 American diplomats and staff. The hostages were trapped for 444 days. It was the biggest collapse in US-Iran relations. The US tried a resume mission but failed. A helicopter carrying 8 Americans crashed. So they decided that they had to negotiate. The US and Iran met up in Algeria. Iran agreed to release the hostages under the condition that the US would keep out of Iran's international affairs. The hostages were released on January 20th, 1981, the exact day Ronald Reagan became president. But after 1981, the US would treat Iran as a threat. They imposed sanctions, cut off trade, and blocked their access to weapons. This became a long-term strategy still happening today. So Iran decided to fight back. But their military isn't nearly as good as the US Army. So they decided to create proxies. Basically, they would support military groups in neighboring countries. And in exchange, these groups would fight for Iran. Iran has proxies in many different Middle Eastern countries. But some of the most important are Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and Houthis in Yemen. So Iran basically created its own sphere of influence in the Middle East, with which it can retaliate on any sanctions from the US. This conflict has been escalating for the past 40 years. The US created many military bases surrounding Iran, and all across the Persian Gulf. And in response, Iran continued arming their proxies. But Iran has also been trying to create nuclear weapons. And this is where things get serious. Because if Iran gets the bomb, the whole balance of power in the region could shift. The US and Israel believe that a nuclear-armed Iran would threaten global security. And so for decades, they've done everything possible to stop it. Sanctions, cyber attacks, and targeted assassinations of Iranian nuclear scientists. In 2015, Iran agreed to limit its nuclear program in exchange for sanction relief. It was called the Iran nuclear deal. But then in 2018, the Trump administration pulled out of the deal, saying it wasn't strong enough. Sanctions came back, and Iran in turn started ramping up its nuclear program again. So today, Iran is closer to building a nuclear bomb than ever before. And tensions are rising again. And now we've arrived at the modern part of this conflict. Iran is getting closer and closer to a nuclear weapon. And this is worrying the US. So on June 22nd, 2025, the US launched an operation aiming to set back the Iranian nuclear program. The targets were deep underground nuclear facilities, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. These cities are very important for Iran's uranium enrichment program. The US operation was named Midnight Hammer. It involved 7 B-2 stealth bombers, flying nearly 12,000 kilometers from Missouri, refueling mid-air multiple times, and dropping bunker-busting bombs weighing over 13 tons each. Simultaneously, cruise missiles were launched from submarines in the Arabian Sea, striking infrastructure that supported Iran's nuclear network. And all of this was done in close coordination with Israel, whose own airstrikes had already begun the previous week, targeting Iranian missile depots and other military infrastructure across Syria and Iraq. Washington called the strike a decisive action to prevent nuclear proliferation. But in Tehran, it was viewed as a direct act of war. Iran quickly responded by attacking a US base in Qatar. It expelled all foreign nuclear inspectors, shut down international monitoring, and announced it would accelerate uranium enrichment beyond previous levels. In other words, if the US bombed Iran to stop it from building a bomb, it may have done the opposite. Many important figures in the United States, including President Donald Trump and several top military officials, have publicly praised the strikes.
We had a tremendous victory, a tremendous hit.
They claimed the mission was a clear success. The targets were hit and the bombers returned safely, and Iran's nuclear capabilities were set back by years, says Donald Trump. While others argue it did minor damage, maybe setting it back by a couple of months. But currently, the risk of escalation is very high. Iran has threatened a bigger counterattack, and Israel expects the US to permit further attacks on Iran if it continues its nuclear program. What we're seeing now is the result of decades of tension. Nuclear ambitions, shifting alliances, broken agreements, and deep mistrust between nations. The US may have bought time, but it has also raised the stakes. Iran is more isolated, regional actors are more volatile, and diplomacy is on thinner ground than ever. What happens next Whether it's renewed negotiations or open war will depend on choices made in the days and weeks ahead, and whether cooler heads can steer this crisis away from something far worse.